So this is the accountant problem where you're entering a number of purchases, and at the end when you enter a -1, then it stops and it prints out the average. This should be 2 here, 2.5. So just to be clear. And so I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to go ahead and give you the full code, and then I will talk about the full code. Give me a second here to get this worked out. So the full code for the accountant problem goes something like this, right? I thought it was a very trivial problem, but then as I began coding it, or maybe I could show you over here, as I began coding it, I saw that it was a little bit more complicated than I originally thought, right? So we need a set of counters, right? One counter is going to be the cost. Another counter is going to be the, oh, well, this one should actually be continue. So let's put here continue. Continue. Or I think continue might be a good keyword, so let's go ahead and put cont. And so how does this work is we're having the cont variable continue the while loop calculations until they enter in, here for cont, until they enter in a -1. And once they enter a -1, it's going to break out of the while loop because this condition is not going to be true. And then it's going to do the correct calculation and print out the average. Right? So we have here cont equal to 0. That's not equal to -1, so it's going to start the while loop. And the sum is going to be equal to the cost plus the sum, right? So I have this here to start out because if I have it afterward, then the calculations are not going to work out correctly. So I have it here to start out, but the first time it calculates sum, it's going to be calculating cost is going to be 0, and oh my gosh, let me leave this as cost. Okay, cost is going to be 0, and sum is going to be equal to 0. So the first calculation is going to be pointless, right? Sum is going to stay the same. But then once the user enters in a number for a cost, we're going to typecast it as an int because sometimes it takes it in as a string. And then we're going to put that into the variable cost. Right? So then our counter variable increments, which is counting how many entries the user enters in so that we can later on calculate the average. And then we come back into the while loop. Right? So since they entered in a value that was not -1 for the cost here of the first item, let's say they entered in 5. Well, 5 is not equal to -1, so it's going to do 5 plus 0. So sum is now equal to 5. And it's going to ask for the next cost and increment the counter. The next cost, increment the counter, and so on until it breaks out of the while loop. Once it breaks out of the while loop, it's going to subtract 1 from the counter because this counting is counting 1 extra. Okay, so if you run through the calculations, you'll find that the counter is incrementing 1 more than it should be with this configuration. So I subtracted 1 from the counter, and then I did the calculation and printed out the sum. So if I run this, where's cost? Okay, so let's do cost here. So if I run this, enter cost 1, enter cost 2, enter cost 3, enter cost 4, and then a -1 to end, then it prints out 2.5 like it should. So that is the accountant problem. The next problem was to make it continue until the user enters in n for no, right? So the way that would work is you would have another while loop, and you guys should have known how to do this because it was asked of you in the guessing game. And so here we have while cont is not equal to, and then let's say n. Okay. And I'm going to put everything inside of the while loop. And so at the end of after the first while loop finishes execution, at the end of the program, I'm going to ask the user, I'm going to say cont is equal to input, would you like to play again? And so if the user enters in anything but the letter n, and cont's equal to anything but the letter n, it's going to come up here and it's going to continue. Okay? Continue running this until the user enters in an n, and it's going to come up here and cont is equal to n. This is not true. And then it's going to break, and then the program's going to end. So that's that problem.